Well, hey, Farm Life family, it's Brent Adams, host of Inside Farm Life, and I wanted to stop by to introduce to you episode 1 of Inside Farm Life, which went to radio this week. It contains a discussion with USDA Meteorologist Brad Rippey, talking about drought conditions in parts of the United States, and he also gives us a planting report for many of the nation's top crops. And then we hear from Scott Heiberger with the National Children's Center for Rural and Agricultural Health and Safety. He talks about keeping those kiddos safe on the farm. You know, school's about to let out and kids are going to be taking on more responsibilities on the farm, and these guys have thought about many ways to keep kids safe, and they want you to put that front and center. So I hope you'll give that a listen. Then we bring in my buddy Jesse Allen with his Market Talk report. He each week brings in some of the brightest minds in the agricultural markets to break everything down for us so we have a better understanding of what's going on there. Then I introduce you to another buddy of mine, Ray Bohacz, the hot rod farmer. You can hear his show, Farm Machinery Digest Radio, each week on SiriusXM Satellite Radio, Rural Radio, Channel 147. He brings some common sense tips to keeping your farm equipment and your vehicles maintained so they don't cost you precious dollars and cents. And then we're going to bring in a weekly music feature called Back to the Country. Why? Because we're taking true traditional country music back to the country where it belongs. And we start out this week with my buddy John Paycheck, who is the son of country music icon Johnny Paycheck. He's got a brand new song that he just dropped last week, aptly named Outlaw's Son. You're going to want to hear that. So make sure you go listen to episode 1 of Inside Farm Life, which comes up right after this message. And be looking out here. We're going to be sharing information in the coming weeks about a companion podcast, which is going to go deeper on a lot of these subjects and bring you information that's going to help you make money, save time, and understand hot button issues in agriculture. And we're going to be doing some live streams both on the ag side and the country music side. We've got a lot going on, and I'm really excited to bring it all to you. But now I want to present to you the first episode of Inside Farm Life. Thanks so much, friends and neighbors. Hope y'all come back and do bring along a friend. Welcome to Inside Farm Life, your weekly connection to agriculture newsmakers, hot button industry issues, educational features, and the best in true country music. I'm your host, Brent Adams, and we thank you for giving us some of your time this week. We have a lot to get to, so we'll start out with some news. And in many areas of the country, drought coverage is expanding nationwide, and so is the potential impact on water resources, crops, and livestock. USDA Radio's Rod Bain reports.
Expansion of drought across the country, especially in the western half of the continental U.S., is raising concerns for ag producers in impacted areas. Foremost, according to USDA Meteorologist Brad Rippey, is worry in places like the Southwest and Central Basin about available water supplies for irrigation.
One of the problems is that we have seen premature melting of already meager snowpacks in many areas, and that has left very little snow still to melt. What snow that did melt is not always reaching streams and rivers. Some of that is soaking into already parched soils.
And then there are commodities covered in drought, a category within the U.S. Drought Monitor, which as of the first week of May indicates
there are a number of crops threatened by this expansive drought, and 3 commodities that really jump out as we move into May, primarily grown across the northern plains. We see durum wheat, 93% of the U.S. production area in drought on May 4th. Also high on that list, sunflower production area, 86% in drought, spring wheat, 82%, and barley at 59%. All of those areas will need appreciable rain during the growing season to help offset the effects of drought that has become well established.
Drought is not as prevalent in the Midwest, although Rippey notes
we do see at this time 26% of the U.S. corn production area in drought. Much of that, though, in some of the western production areas, 22% of the soybean production area in drought.
Regarding other crops and commodities in drought, per the May 4th U.S. Drought Monitor,
we also see winter wheat, 35% in drought, sorghum, 33%, cotton, 31% in drought. And one of the concerns there is that the really heavily cropped areas of West Texas remain extremely dry. Cattle production areas in drought for the U.S., 36% in drought, and then hay production areas in drought, 33% of the country.
I'm Rod Bain reporting for the U.S. Department of Agriculture in Washington, D.C.
Also this week, USDA Meteorologist Brad Rippey provided us with an update on U.S. planting progress for corn, soybeans, spring wheat, cotton, rice, peanuts, and sugar beets. We start out with a status report on corn.
Now, last week, we had a number of states that exceeded the 30% planted in 1 week mark. We did that with only one state this week. It was South Dakota, planting 41% of its corn in just the last week to reach 66% overall. But we did have 5 other states that made it past the 20% in 1 week mark. That list included Illinois, Nebraska, North Dakota, Wisconsin, and Minnesota. The common theme among those states is that most of those were in the upper Midwest where they did not get the heavy rain. Just the only problem there, really just the cold weather. So if you put the 2 weeks together, some of those upper Midwestern states planted an enormous amount of corn in the 2 week period. Minnesota, 2 week progress, 67%. Nebraska just behind at 65% planted in the 2 week period.
Rippey says soybean planting progress is similar to the corn planting progress.
We did see relatively good planting progress in a lot of those same upper Midwestern states. 20% or more of the crop planted just during the last week in Iowa, Minnesota, Nebraska, and South Dakota. The big winner in the planting of soybeans department was Minnesota, planting a remarkable 42% just in the last week, 63% over the last 2 weeks. That said, there were a few areas, mainly in the southern and eastern part of the Midwest, where we did see some fairly slow field work as rain shut things down fairly early in the week. Ohio, a good example of that. We saw just 3% of the crop planted during the week to reach 20% overall. But even there, that's ahead of the 5-year average pace of 13%. So not a concern yet, just one very slow week in that wetter area of the South and East.
Rippey also says spring wheat planting has progressed at a good pace despite drought conditions in many spring wheat areas.
As we take a look at the spring wheat crop in the drought-affected northern plains and Northwest, no surprise that planting is occurring at a very rapid pace. 70% of the spring wheat seeded by May 9th, well ahead of the 5-year average of 51% and last year's 40%. We now see planting progress past the 90% mark in states like Idaho, Minnesota, and South Dakota. Spring wheat emergence is occurring despite the dry conditions, but we will need moisture to sustain the crop during development over the next several weeks. 29% of the U.S. spring wheat emerged by May 9th. 20% is the 5-year average. Last year at this time, 15%. And the one state that is showing emergence that's only on par with its normal stage, despite fairly rapid planting, is Montana. 20% emerged, 5-year average is 20%. It would not hurt to get some moisture and also some warmer weather for that crop as we move through the next few weeks.
Rippey notes a mixed bag in terms of cotton planting progress.
Taking a look at cotton planting progress for the week ending May 9th, 1/4 of the nation's intended cotton acreage planted on that date, 1 percentage point behind the 5-year average and 5 points behind this time a year ago. Very much a mixed bag in terms of cotton planting progress. It's been dry in the far west, so we see relatively good planting progress in states like Arizona and California, both 75% complete, both just 3 points behind the 5-year average of 78%. So pretty much right on par. But from the Delta eastward, Mississippi Delta eastward, we do see some planting delays due to wetness. Those numbers are showing up in a number of states. Just to give a couple of quick examples, Arkansas just 19% planted, 5-year average is 35%. Missouri just 10% planted, 5-year average 39%. And that just reflects some of the wetness and the cool weather that has been slowing field work across that region. As you move into the southeast, it's been a bit drier as you move closer to the Atlantic coast. That has allowed South Carolina to move ahead to 40% planted. 5-year average is 29%.
Rain in many areas of the country hasn't done peanut farmers any favors. Rippey says the pace of planting the nation's peanut crop is falling behind schedule.
Now 23% of the overall peanut crop planted. 5-year average 30%. We're also behind last year's 25%. We did finally see some planting progress across the southern high plains. So, for example, we saw our first acreage planted in Oklahoma moving up from 0 to 15% planted, and Texas going from 0 to 8% planted. Much faster progress in parts of the Southeast, especially where it's been drier. And so now South Carolina and Virginia have outpaced Florida in terms of overall planting progress. South Carolina jumping from 19 to 43% planted, Virginia almost doubling from 21 to 40% planted. So that's showing where some of the drier areas are there in the Southeast.
Rippey also says heavy rain in some rice production areas has affected planting efforts.
The heavy rain struck a week ago in the Western Gulf Coast region. That has slowed final rice planting efforts in that region. At this point, we're now 92% planted in Texas, but that's only a 1% increase from last week. 87% planted in Louisiana, up 3 points from last week. Fieldwork going to a virtual standstill following the heavy early May rainfall there. Much better situation in the Delta. We've caught up a lot of the earlier delays. So now Arkansas, the number one rice production state in the U.S., now 77% planted. That matches the 5-year average of 77%. Nationally, overall, 74% of the U.S. rice planted by May 9th. 5-year average is 71%, and last year at this time, 67%. Rice emergence managing to keep up with the normal pace for the most part. 52% rice emerged. 5-year average is 53%, and last year at this time, just 41%.
And finally, this week, Rippey has the last look at sugar beets for the 2021 season.
The acreage is now 97% planted, a big jump from last week's 81%. That means that sugar beet planting is finishing up well ahead of the average pace. Normally, we're just at 71% on May 9th, and far ahead of last year's 58%. Planting progress is 95% or greater in all 4 major production states: Idaho, Michigan, Minnesota, and North Dakota. The only concern for sugar beets at this point, primarily across the north central United States, the Red River Valley, is that it has been very cool during May, and that has slowed the emergence and early development of the crop.
Many companies promise increased yields and a higher return on investment, but again and again, results show that one company stands apart from the rest. Concept Agri-Tek delivers innovative concepts utilizing the latest technologies in agronomy, biology, and chemistry to enhance soil and plant health with seed treatment, planter-applied fertilizers, foliar fertilizers, and full-season soil treatment solutions. To find out how to put Concept Agri-Tek to work for you, visit conceptagritech.com. Concept Agri-Tek. Technology where you need it most. Well, next up this week on Inside Farm Life, the school year is winding down, which means the kiddos will be spending more time around the house and around the farm. And in some areas of the country, they're still planting. In some areas, that first hay cut is rapidly approaching. There are many dangers to be aware of. So I wanted to bring in Scott Heiberger, the communications manager with the National Children's Center for Rural and Agricultural Health and Safety in Marshfield, Wisconsin, to talk about some of the new resources his agency has aimed at keeping those youngins safe as we get into the summertime. And Scott, welcome to Inside Farm Life.
Hey, good to be with you, Brent.
Well, we talk about the seasonal dangers, but really on the farm, there's never a time to not be vigilant when it comes to safety. And the fact of the matter is, on the farm this time of the year, children and young adults take a more active role or hired as help, and they don't have the experience that the seasoned veterans have, and what they don't know could be harmful to them. So it's incumbent upon parents and other farm operators who call on children to help to watch out for them, and that's where your organization comes in. And we look at the data and see over the past decade that youth have died more than any other period in working in agriculture than any other industries, and that bothers us, and I know it bothers you. So you guys combined and looked at the data and said, hey, we need to step up educational efforts on this matter. And from that comes 3 new safety resource booklets. Tell us a bit about what you've got here.
Well, we wanted to pull together something that adults, the responsible adults, that could be the parents, that could be the hiring manager, something that they could use to match kids with jobs that they could handle. And these booklets, they take you through physical aspects and mental aspects, emotional aspects, and to try to get the right fit. So a kid's not over his head, so you're setting them up to succeed in the job. And these 3 booklets, they focus on 3 kind of broad areas. You've got gardening, which is a new area for us. Gardening safety, different aspects there. You've got working with animals, and you have working with machinery. And we feel like especially the animals and machinery, if you can get a good grip on those areas. Those tend to produce the most injuries. And so what the booklets do, they draw upon something that we've had for a long time called the Ag Youth Work Guidelines. And each of these booklets, for instance, the machinery, they pull together all the different guidelines that you might encounter when you're working around machinery. That could be, hooking up the implements, operating a tractor, different things that relate to that. And what each of the guidelines does in these booklets, the person assigning the job, the adult assigning the job, can look at the little checklist and say, can this child lift 50 pounds? Can this child remember, repeat back the instructions to me after I give it to them? And by asking the kids some of these questions and going through this checklist, it can give that adult, a decent indication of whether that job is a good fit for that child.
Well, I think that's so important too. I mean, one of the things that you brought up there is child development and communication. And I think that's so important because, a lot of times folks operating on a farm just want to get the job done. They want an extra set of hands to help out, but they don't stop and think that, these are just kids and they're just learning, they're just developing. And what they do now and what they teach them is not only going to carry them through the rest of their life, but it's going to trickle down to that next generation and how they're taught these things. So this is really a cyclical thing, and it's really important to catch early on.
And you think about youth, you think about when you were assigned a job, you mean I get to drive that tractor? I get to operate that machinery? That's cool. And so if an adult would say to me, okay, you got it? And of course I'd say, yeah, because I just want to get on there and drive it. So it's, we can't count on the youth to ask questions, so sometimes they don't want to ask questions. So they don't want to admit they didn't catch something. And so, while we're working on the youth and encouraging them, saying, hey, now repeat it back to me. So that way you're not asking them a yes and no question. If you say, you got it? They're going to say yes. But if you say, okay, repeat back to me what I just assigned to you, then you can kind of catch whether they really absorbed it. So yeah, we really encourage the adults to take the lead in that regard and don't count on the kids to say, no, I don't know how to do that, because sometimes pride gets in the way.
And you're talking about, as you said, everything from gardening to farm equipment to working with animals. In your day-to-day work, what are some of the biggest pitfalls that you see?
Working around machinery is as far as fatal injuries is the number one, and that would include skid steers and ATVs and obviously tractors and any type of machinery. Working with animals can produce a high end as far as number of injuries there, even just slips and falls as far as non-fatal injuries. But machinery would definitely be the number one.
And as we talked about, these guidelines come from the Agricultural Youth Work Guidelines, which you guys have developed, and they cover more than 50 commonly performed tasks. And you get into some protective strategies and also the roles that adults play. And I don't think you can underscore that enough, because if you're putting kids out there, the responsibility is on you to make sure it's done safely.
Right. And so we try to make it as easy as possible and as visual as possible for that adult. So as part of these guidelines, you can go onto our site, cultivatesafety.org, cultivate safety, all one word, and look up these guidelines. And each of these 50-something guidelines has a poster, like you can print it out as an 8.5 by 11 PDF. And if you want to do kind of a tailgate training, and take it right out to the site with the young person and just go through the checklist, for instance, these PDFs are customizable to some extent. You can change color of the machinery. Sometimes that's important depending on your audience. You can change actually skin tones on the individual. Sometimes the person being trained, it's helpful to see themselves in the PDF and in the artwork. And so there's some neat features to this. And you can print them out and use them as a teaching tool.
Well, it's neat because even if you don't want to print them out, you can still access those PDFs right on your phone and your tablet, and you can take them right out to the field with you. That PDF version of the booklets can be accessed at cultivatesafety.org/work-guideline-booklets. And we'll put that link on the Farm Life page and the Farm Life group page on Facebook, so you can access it there. We'll also include instructions on how you can order physical copies of that booklet. And I understand it's available in English right now, but you're also working on publishing them in Spanish and French. So for those folks to access it, be on the lookout for that soon as well.
Yeah, and that should be in. I haven't checked the website this week, but those other language versions, you're right, they should be up any day now.
For all things safety, make sure you keep an eye on cultivatesafety.org throughout the year for more vital tips about keeping children safe on the farm. And Scott, we want to thank you so much for taking the time to come and talk with us today here on Inside Farm Life. And we'd love to have you back again around harvest time to give us an update on the latest from the National Children's Center for Rural and Agricultural Health and Safety.
We'd love to do that, Brent. Thanks a lot.
Next up on Inside Farm Life, we know market analysis is important to many in agriculture, so each week we'll bring you our weekly Market Talk segment with Jesse Allen. He brings in some of the brightest analysts in the business to break down weekly movements in the market, and this week we kick things off talking about the May WASDE reports. Jesse.
And thank you very much, Brent. Happy to bring this Market Talk update to Inside Farm Life. We take a look at the May USDA WASDE report that was released on Wednesday. Mike Zuzolo of Global Commodity Analytics joined me as a guest on Market Talk Wednesday afternoon to talk about the report. And there weren't that many surprises, but there were a few out there. And I first asked Mike about the surprises that he saw, especially on the corn side.
Yeah, and I think the biggest non-surprise for the corn, and we'll start there, is that the wheat feeding came in a big way, Jesse. And we had been talking about this, and USDA picked up on this. And so in this sense, it's real-time data. They're expecting that the June to August wheat feeding will displace corn at the greatest level since like 2013. So it's a big number that we're going to be losing in terms of corn feeding. When we look at the carryover numbers, I think that's probably where the biggest surprise was for me. We aren't building stocks that much, but we really aren't losing stocks, and it kind of gives you the impression that domestically the high prices are really doing a good job of keeping the corn here in this country and not letting it go to the export market. In fact, USDA took down their total domestic production, or raised it by about 4.5% versus last year, and they took down their new crop exports down about 12% from the current marketing year. So they are continuing on that theme that corn exports are going to lose to the domestic side of the equation.
I also talked to Mike and asked him if he thought that growers, producers, farmers need to change anything with their mindset about their marketing plan here as we work past this May WASDE report. Here was what Mike had to say.
We're in May. We're caught up on planning, and we've got a lot of external things going on. And, I've talked about how this seems to be like a baseline year of 2008, 2012. I still think it's more like 2008 because of the inflationary pressure. In fact, the CPI number that came out, Consumer Price Index number, year over year, it jumped the most in some categories, the highest since 2008. And so I think, Jesse, with this Colonial Pipeline going down and noticing how fragile our supply chain still is after the pandemic, noticing that the CPI supercharged up the interest rate yields again and the bond yields started to jump, and that then ignited the dollar. We've got a lot more potential headwinds. And so I really I'm doing analysis on this right now, so I'm not 100% through this yet. But what I'm starting to formulate in my mind at this stage, given we've got an average price by USDA and all these other factors going on the one hand, I could see the government coming in and establishing price controls in some way, shape, or form, or the Federal Reserve comes in and raises interest rates earlier than they said, and effectively establishing a price control by knocking the inflation bull in the head. That's on the one side. So we've got downside potential, I think, because of that. And again, just because of the nature of the soybean supplies in Brazil, if they're there. And then on the upside, we have the potential where we've got enough chemical problems, enough supply chain problems. Farmers are starting to talk to me about not being able to get enough chemicals. Farmers are starting to talk to me about not being able to get tractor parts for fixing tractors that are only 5 or 6 years old right now. And so then I start thinking to myself, what happens if we can't get into the fields? What happens if we can't get to the harvest? What I'm getting at is I'm kind of drawing up a Dale Carnegie type mindset. What's the worst thing that can happen, and what's the best thing that can happen? And under both scenarios, and this is a long-winded answer, but under both scenarios, it's a bought-put mindset that I have. I don't want to sell too much cash, and I want to get a floor underneath me, especially in those markets that are carrying a futures premium when you factor in the cash basis.
And lastly, I asked Mike if there was anything new with the weather forecast, as that's been one of the fundamentals we've been standing on in this market. If there was anything new with the weather forecast that he saw that might change some perspectives on our marketing plan.
Yeah, if the current pattern sets itself up and establishes itself in the middle of summer where we're dry in the northern plains, but we're cold and wet in the Corn Belt, I'm not sure the La Nina bull will really stick around for that. But I would say by the same token, me as a fundamental analyst that works with producers, it's almost worse for producers to have cool and wet weather than it is to have drouthy weather, because you can't get your herbicides down, you can't get your bugs go crazy, and then your yields suffer because you're too wet. The beans don't like the wet feed, so on and so forth. So I'm actually going to lower my national yields if we stay cool and wet. And these models, I can't remember a time when these models have been so off compared to what the forecasts were. Like May was supposed to be hot and dry. We've been the exact opposite across the whole Corn Belt. It's not just been one side or the other. It's been the whole Corn Belt has been cool and wet, and it was supposed to be mostly warm and dry. So I would say don't go more than 5 days out and trusting the weather right now, and be ready for a lower national yield come August, September if we stay cool and wet.
And again, that's comments with Mike Zuzolo of Global Commodity Analytics from Wednesday's episode of Market Talk, getting his reaction to the USDA WASDE report for the month of May. This has been a Market Talk update for Inside Farm Life in Nashville, Tennessee. I'm Jesse Allen reporting.
And you can find Jesse's daily market updates at markettalkag.com. Again, that's markettalkag.com. And you can find him by searching Market Talk on Facebook. He also appears on the American Ag Network, and you can hear him host Your Ag Today, weekday mornings about 6:50 a.m. Eastern on SiriusXM Satellite Radio, Rural Radio, Channel 147. Next up on Inside Farm Life, I want to introduce you to my friend, the hot rod farmer, Ray Bohacz. He brings a common sense approach to keeping your equipment and vehicles maintained on the farm. You can check out all of his great multimedia content at farmmachinerydigest.com.
Welcome to Bushels and Cents from Farm Machinery Digest Radio, heard exclusively on SiriusXM Channel 147 Rural Radio. I am your host, Ray Bohacz, the hot rod farmer. And never forget, it is not what you make, but what you keep that counts. There are many small engines that are essential workers on a farm. They may be tiny, but one that does not run can bring your operation to its knees. Often, a scenario like this plays out. The engine starts cold and runs fine. You shut it off for a few minutes and then it will not restart. An hour or so later, it runs again. Though a few different issues can present this way, try this simple test. Loosen the gas cap. A plugged vent may be the problem. Agriculture runs on machinery, profits on reliability. Visit farmmachinerydigest.com, where steel and soil meet.
And you can catch Ray Bohacz's Farm Machinery Digest Radio on SiriusXM Rural Radio Channel 147. It airs each Saturday at 11 a.m. Eastern and again on Sundays at 6 p.m. Eastern, so I hope you go and give him a listen. Well, now that we have business out of the way, it's time to exhale, kick up our heels, and delve into a segment that we call Back to the Country. Each week, we'll spotlight country music singers and songwriters making true traditional country music. In a few weeks, when we launch the Inside Farm Life podcast and live streams, we'll also be bringing you in-depth interviews from many of those artists, and we have some great ones lined up, so stay tuned. This week, I wanted to share with you the very latest release from my friend John Paycheck, the son of country music icon Johnny Paycheck. John has nobly served his country in the U.S. Army and has now relaunched his own music career, and he's doing country music the way it was meant to be done, just like his daddy did it. This is his latest, aptly named Outlaw's Son on Inside Farm Life.
Son, don't do those things I've done. I understand I right those wrongs, but I'm bound for those gates where the devil plays my hand. Take my guns and that old guitar, do with it what you will. Show them all you're an outlaw son. He's more than his father's mistakes. Be more, be more, be more than I could be. Be more. This life is a lonely ride with a gun by your side. This outlaw kept his family fed. Hangman told him someone had to pay.
That was John Paycheck with Outlaw's Son. You can learn more about his career at johnpaycheck.com. Well, that's all the time we have for this week, friends and neighbors. For now, it's Brent Adams. Let's meet up here again next week. And hey, bring along a friend. You've been listening to Inside Farm Life, a production of Farm Life Media. If you have topic suggestions for future episodes, drop us a line at brent@farmlifemedia.com, and be sure to like the Farm Life page and join the Farm Life group on Facebook.